Welcome to Mamahood After Trauma, where healing and mamahood intersect. I'm Emily, your host. Join us as we discover practical strategies to nurture ourselves with kindness and understanding. Stay tuned for insights and inspiration to support you on your path of healing and growth. Let's dive in together. This is Mamahood After Trauma. Hello, Mama, and welcome to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I'm so excited that you have taken some time out of your busy mama schedule to tune in and listen. Today, I am joined by the amazing Rebekah Scott. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive right in. You lost a brother to suicide. And you have been working through that. Can you share a little bit of your story? And we'll just go from there.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I love that you say dive right in and then you drop that bomb because
Yeah.
I think anybody also who's listening, and obviously a lot of your listeners listen to a lot of trauma, it never gets easy to say it and it never gets easy to hear it, especially when it's close to the heart. You know, when someone says they're having mental health issues, thankfully it's been more normalized where we can at least talk about it a little bit. But suicide has so much shame still wrapped around it that it's still very gripping when someone says, "Oh yes, you lost a brother to suicide." I'm like, "Oh, yes." So my story with it was 2014, and I'd have to back up to tell you a little bit what led to it, or how I've worked through it more or less, because living through it.
Yeah, it's heavy.
I live in South Dakota, and in South Dakota, it's actually West River, East River. So it's this whole thing where if you're from the west side of the state or the east side of the state, and it's like us versus them type of thing. So we're always super proud that we were West River people. Well, we ended up moving and we ranched out there. So when you're a ranch kid, you're never moving. Like you're married to the land. My brothers were both in school for ag. Like you're a ranch kid. That's not the case for us. My dad had a falling out with his dad. And after 45 years of farming with granddad, my dad said, "Enough, I'm moving." And he was going through a ton of abuse with his dad. And he picked us up and we moved in 3 days in horse trailers and moved across the state.
Oh, wow.
And so we had to quickly adjust to, it felt like a whole nother state, even though it was still South Dakota, but the way that it is, if you know anything about it, it's like a different state. My brothers stayed in college, switched their degrees so that they could, use them and not return to the ranch. And we farmed also. So anyways, there's that background. Well, that moved because my siblings and I have two older brothers, Philip, Joshua, and then I have a twin sister, Sarah. That moved caused us to be even closer than we were. Now, we were really tight when we lived West River as well. But when we moved, it was its own form of trauma because we're leaving what we thought we'd have for years and years and years, splitting from our grandparents, the whole thing, and then throwing us into high school as juniors, and then my brothers switching majors. So its own set of like problems. But we got super, super tight. And what a blessing. And so throughout the years, even when we graduated high school, I talked to my siblings, at least one of them, at least once a day, and usually all of them once a day. So just to give you background on how close we were, very same mindset, cheer each other on and all of that. My brother went through a horrific divorce and some forging of signatures with shopaholic from his wife. And then he was going through alcoholism and also meth, but then beat the meth. And so it's, a whole like cocktail of terrible things that was occurring to him, which we know now was really high anxiety and depression, but he was self-medicating. So put him in, you name it. I think we had 4 different treatment programs for him. We tried everything. So somehow that gives me peace that the things that were available to us at that time, we tried everything. Still not enough, but we're people of faith, and my brother was a person of faith as well. And so I know that he's being so well taken care of, and that is where he wanted to be anyways. So he died by suicide in 2014. And I do love the new phrasing around suicide is that when you lose someone to that, you say died by suicide. Do
Mm.
not use the word committed, because it is not something that they consciously, they think they are choosing, but it's not like I'm committed to this. It's not that. And I think such a good takeaway for the families too. It's not, because there's a lot of people who say really dumb things during something like that.
Yeah.
And so when the phrasing now is to say they died by suicide, it's just like they died from cancer, they died from suicide, they died from a heart attack. It's in that same realm. So that makes me feel a little bit better talking about it like that, because there was so much that was out of his control. Anyways, so he passes, and we are wrecked with, how do you mourn something so unexpected? Even though I had signs, and I kept telling my dad and my mom and my siblings, I'm like, I think he's suicidal. I think he's suicidal. And they kept saying, no, he won't. We're people of faith. That's not going to be an option. He won't do that. And he did. So that is the majority of the story. But working through that, of my personality, I run 3 brands and I have 4 kiddos, and we farm and ranch now. Also, I married a rancher and a farmer. And I thought, I'm just going to kind of go through the waves, because I'm also like a super practical. So I'm like, okay, here are the grief stages. I'm just going to go through them. Well, it turns out they don't, they're not, sometimes they're not in order, and they can linger. And I was like,
Yep.
excuse me, I had my to-do list. I was doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned to have more grace with myself and for my siblings for when they're experiencing a wave that I have passed,
Mm.
or when the wave comes back for myself. And so some practical ways that I've processed the trauma is therapy, for one. And I've actually also practiced not just talk therapy, which I believe has a place. Believe me, it has a place.
Mm-hmm.
But actually removing the trauma from my body, because I have something wild to tell you about how the trauma came out in my child. Horse therapy has been really strong for me. It's called the Draper Method. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
interested, go to 605 Roots. It's an amazing organization run by my sister-in-law, actually, and how this movement on the horse will help release some of the emotions and the trauma. So it's a mind-body connection, and I super, super advocate for that. And then also just the gentle reminders I have everywhere in my studio and with my family. And because I'm so close to my siblings, we can call each other and say, hey, today I'm just really thinking about him. So this month, and I'm not sure when this will air, but his birthday's on March 31st. And so we always celebrate Philip on March 31st. And I have a bag, I sew bag and accessories. That's called the Philip bag. And $10 of every one of those bags goes to the AFSP. That's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And it's been such a beautiful project, because I'm able to write fairly large checks to them quarterly, because people keep buying this Philip bag to honor him, and to possibly honor whoever in their family has also suffered through these kind of losses, because I put their loved one's shirt. I wish I could show you. I put their loved one's cotton button downs on the inside of the bag, so they could carry their loved one with them forever.
Oh, wow.
It's a super meaningful project that continues to remind me, like, as tragic as it was, he still lives on. And
Mm-hmm.
I can talk about it openly on my own podcast and on things like this, and telling people just the signs to look for, and even how to, like, grieve. Not that you can tell somebody how to grieve, but just different ways of, like, well, how are you grieving, and what are some of the things that really worked, has been very beneficial. But this is the part that I gotta tell you that is just wild. My youngest child, I was pregnant the time when Philip died, and I have a twin sister. She was also pregnant. Her first, my fourth. And nobody knew that I was pregnant other than my husband. We just weren't yet. And going through the labor, still in grief, because it was only like 6 months later that I went into labor, still grieving him intensely. Everything reminded me of him. And now, if it was a boy, very high chance we were going to name him Philip, because my husband also loved and adored him. And she was a little girl. So we named her, it starts with a P, her name is Pixon. Anyways, when she was born, she had an underdeveloped diaphragm, because she was so quiet. So imagine you have a newborn and she's crying, but I'm like, oh, this kid's really quiet. And so the doctor ran some tests and she passed everything, except he said, yeah, something's going on. So take her back a couple months later, and she was just quiet. She had an underdeveloped diaphragm. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So they gave us a couple exercises when she gets older, blow on those little windmills and, she'll develop her diaphragm. But I always kept thinking, I wonder what that's about. Then in therapy, it's called emotional relief therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Talking through, she said, we're doing this new thing called a rebirthing experience for moms who are grieving or going through a traumatic experience while they are pregnant or giving birth, because those emotions transfer to your child.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, great. So as if we don't have enough guilt mamas, now we have to worry about what emotions we had while we were in labor. And I'm like, I was pretty angry with my third, not with her in particular, but just with some things. And I'm like, I better process her. But then I thought, well, I should really do pics because I knew I was grieving. And so I had all these, like, I was still angry with him also, obviously, because I wanted him to stay, but I was sad, all the emotions. So I'm like, we need to do this exercise on my daughter Pixon. And without the therapist knowing anything, I said I was grieving my brother with my youngest. And she said, oh, yeah, grief shows up in their diaphragm.
Man. We interrupt this amazing conversation for a word from our sponsor. Are you tired of feeling like you're on an emotional roller coaster in mamahood? Ready to break free from the fear and frustration that's holding you back? Introducing Mama Untriggered private podcast series, a transformative 5-episode journey to help you calm your nervous system and reclaim your strength in mamahood. In each episode, we'll guide you through practical, actionable steps to understand your triggers, build your trigger toolbox, and harness the power of community for support. Say goodbye to those moments of overwhelm and hello to more peaceful, empowered you. You didn't become a mama to spend your day on edge. It's time to take control of your emotional well-being and create a positive, joyful experience for you and your littles. Ready to break free from the emotional roller coaster? Subscribe now to the Mama Untriggered private podcast series and start your journey to a calmer, happier mamahood today.
I'm like, well, what? And she says, yeah, when they process grief during the labor, most likely it'll show up in the child's diaphragm. She didn't know anything. So walking through, and then we had a session for pics to release. And now, after releasing those emotions that weren't even hers in pics, and she has improved her reading level at school, and her voice test came out clear and all of that because we were able to release some of all this trauma. So that was wild to learn and experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
God is God is a genius in his
Genius.
in his
Absolutely
creation.
genius.
It is he is
Mhm.
oh man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what signs did you see in your brother
Mhm.
that tipped you off?
This is a strange one, but I've seen it come true so many times. If they start, one second, I've got little ones in the background here. Picture, you got to go downstairs, okay? Okay. Um, they're my olders are familiar, my youngers are not. Everybody listening will understand that. The signs. They will start reaching out to friends and family that they haven't reached out to for years.
Mm.
And they will say they're doing great and they just haven't talked to you in forever. And what they're doing, at least in Philip's case and what I've read for several others, is they are saying their goodbyes. They're tying up all the loose ends because they don't want, especially in Philip's case where he was extra discerning. Like he could feel anybody in the room, he could tell you how they were feeling without them speaking, but just had definitely the gift of discernment. he was calling these to make it right. Like, he didn't have anything to apologize. He was just putting a nice, neat bow on it. He called my cousin Toby. And Toby's like, I got the coolest phone call from Philip, and it was so awesome. He was in such a great mood. And we just caught up like we haven't caught up in years. And right away, I didn't know it then, but after during the funeral, I was like, and then another person comes up and they're like, yeah, Philip just called me. I'm so surprised we're here at this funeral. He just, and that's what's going on. So if they've created a plan, I shouldn't group it because it's just never like that, you guys, but these are some things. Okay. Lots of phone calls will be made. They're really elevated and super, super happy because they've come up with a plan and they know when and they know how. And so there's a relief for them of like, okay, here's when it's going to happen. That's a concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your journey like moving through that? Because
Mhm.
there's survivor's guilt, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's, mamahood in the mix of all of that. And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
what was that like for you?
I didn't have survivor's guilt in this case with suicide. It was more guilt that I didn't do more. I was present for a
Mm,
couple other attempts, but I didn't realize they were attempts at the time. So one time he tried to get the guns from my parents' place while I was there with my kiddos. And I was upstairs giving them a bath, and they were 3 and under, two of them, 3 and under. No, like 5 and under. And I just got this feeling. I was like, I have to go downstairs. I was at my parents' place for the weekend. I was like, I have to go downstairs. Why would I leave little kids in the bathtub? But it was so strong. I was like, I got to go down. I barreled down the stairs so I could go quick and ask my mom, can you go up and watch the kids? And she went up and watched the kids. And when I got there, he was almost out the door with guns. We hunt, and all that. I was like, wait, where are you going? It's like, I just got to get him clean. I could tell he was drunk. And I was like, nope, you're not cleaning him tonight. And I had to wrestle him. Like, I mean, wrestle. And during the wrestling, I could stare him in the eyes and I could tell that it wasn't
mhm,
him, like that this
mhm.
was a force outside of us. And I said to him, Philip, Philip, and I called for his name, making eye contact so he could see his sister, his little sister. And I said, Philip, it's Becca. And he let go just long enough for me to grip all the guns and shove him out the door. And it was a God note. It was just like he just all of a sudden realized it was me and let me have enough grip and shove him out the door. So that would have been an attempt that night that God seriously just put me there. And then
Intervened.
there was another time when I was traveling in Sioux Falls, that's the nearest town near us, and I was running errands, and I had the two kids with me, and I had a hat that I wanted to give Philip, and I wasn't going to give him to that day because I was like, I got to get home before nap time, you know.
Mhm.
And then I was like, I have to drop this hat off today. It was like a strong feeling. I was like, no, like I better. I dropped it off, and he was having alcoholic seizure, a withdrawal seizure, because he was desperately trying, as they all do, to get sober, but their body is so addicted that it actually begs for it. And
Mhm.
the ambulance people will tell you, give them a beer. To get them out of the seizure, they will say, give them alcohol because it'll get them out of the seizure. That's how used to the body it was. So it was another attempt that I got him to the hospital in time and everything. And then he had one in our backyard while playing beanbags with my son. So these are all, I mean, at that time, that was not an attempt, but that was a rescue mission at that point because he went into a full seizure in front of us and we were able to get him there. So to work, I'm back to your question, to work through it, it's just this many years out, it's reminding myself and finally working through the memories that were really, really sweet
Mm.
and really, really good. Instead of working through the last scenes and what I could have done, I'm more apt to, I wouldn't say I romanticize it, but I'm able to focus on the good memories and the childhood memories and even the young adulthood memories with them and less about the last year of what I could have done, which
Mm.
I can't redo what happened.
No, you can't redo it. So, what
Mm-hmm.
tips do you have for someone who is just beginning their journey through the grief of losing a loved one in
Mm-hmm.
this manner?
Yes. If you've lost a loved one to suicide, this is not comforting, but it is just like kind of like a data point, is that if they've made a plan, they're very good at executing it. It is their form of relief. And you have to remind yourself that, at least from what I've read, they aren't thinking like, what will this do to my sibling? What will this do to my grandchild? What will this do to my child? They are so craving relief from this overwhelming disease of depression, overwhelming, that it's just as if you're going through a heart attack. You're just praying that they get the shot in you as fast as possible. That's the feelings that they're going through at that last moment. So they can't compartmentalize the empathy part of it, like, but what about my wife? And what about my child? And what about my sister? They're just like, relief, 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 relief. That's just the method. So that too helped me to think, like, I couldn't be angry at him because he couldn't think of anybody outside of relief in that moment. So that was slightly more comforting to me. And if you're grieving this, get every single thing of therapy you can think of, including physical therapy. So not like when you go because your knee is frayed, but I would definitely encourage, there's quite a few horse therapies that help work the trauma and the emotions out. Talk therapy is good. Friends, walking, family, holding their artifacts near you. So I'm looking in my studio here. I have the Philip bag that reminds me of him, but I have a picture of him doing construction, which is where his joy was. We talk about him frequently in our home a lot. We celebrate him. We do little ceremonies for his birthday, and that sort of thing has helped walk through it. But definitely don't seek out therapies that are both physical and mental and spiritual. And don't believe the world's way of saying that it was a selfish act, because again, they just want relief. If you can think of something that you're like, I just got to scratch that itch, that intense, you're not thinking about anything other than relief. So seek out therapy, seek out prayer, put the reminders next to you, and then ultimately give people grace. There is something about suicide that is still so shameful, and people say the dumbest thing, but they're just uncomfortable too. So I always say, breathe grace and forgiveness within the same breath. So as soon as you're like, oh my gosh, why would, take a deep breath, grace, and then forgiveness right afterwards. Because if you don't forgive, you just get bitter and bitter, and that's not what they want for you either, your loved one that passed. So grace and forgiveness in the same breath is like, they just don't know any better. They just, and they're uncomfortable just like you are. So just show them grace and forgiveness in the same sentence.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, surround yourself with community, because that is huge on a healing journey, whether it's from losing a loved one to suicide or another form of trauma. Community, we were created to be in community. So
yes, absolutely.
it's huge, and the benefits are massive. How can our listeners connect with you further?
Well, you can listen to my podcast. I've actually got several on there that also deal with a little bit of mental health and how to pursue them. My podcast is called The Encourager, and it's available pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts, including YouTube as well. And if you go to theencouragerpodcast.com, I have a load of free resources that are also about how to be intentional in relationships. That's a really good freebie for you if you click on the resource tab. And that's because it comes naturally for me to be intentional with my siblings like I was. And that has been a very big comfort in my grieving process, is that I did spend a ton of time in that relationship when he was well, because I was intentional about it. So I've got a resource on how to keep pursuing intentional relationships in your life, because they say marijuana is the gateway drug. It's actually loneliness. And I think that was some of the case for Philip too, is just feeling a great amount of loneliness. And so if we can prevent that, we can prevent a lot of things. So go to theencouragerpodcast.com for those resources.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story so openly and vulnerably.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I just remind everybody, if you see these signs of someone who is normally very depressed and withdrawn, engaging and super happy, but nothing else has changed in the background, no therapy or anything like that, start asking questions. It might be a warning sign that there's been a plan made. So start asking the questions. Are you okay? Do you feel safe? Do you have a plan? It's okay to say those words.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in to this episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. If you would like more of the Mamahood After Trauma community, make sure to look in the description of this episode for the link to become a Mamahood After Trauma Inner Circle member. Until next time, Mama, keep